Today, we're going to talk about the DCA Simulation tool. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. I do want to tell you, though, that this DCA tool, I think it's important for everyone to use. Now, the first thing I will say is that we've been saying that, in pre-halving years and in bear market years, if you want exposure to crypto, Bitcoin oftentimes tends to be better than most, but not all altcoins. It's hard to know which altcoins will outperform Bitcoin in the pre-halving year and the bear market year. There's always a few, and I'm not trying to take away from those altcoins that have outperformed. There's always a few that do, always. Okay, and I say that all the time. It's just that the collective altcoin market behaves historically in a fairly predictable way against Bitcoin during this phase of the market cycle. And so we said that if you want exposure to crypto, then Bitcoin is likely going to outperform most altcoins. And so a DCA strategy into Bitcoin tends to be worthwhile, whereas a DCA strategy into altcoins tends to not be as worthwhile. Now, I've seen a lot of people on Twitter or X, right? And what they'll say is, well, just you wait. This is the best argument that they have for the altcoin market is just you wait. And to some degree, I agree that eventually altcoins will turn back up and they will go higher. I agree with that statement. What I don't agree with is that not every altcoin will turn back up and go to new highs. Not everyone will. So, sort of the retort of just you wait. Yes, it's true that the collective altcoin market will likely eventually go to new all-time highs. Every individual altcoin that saw these crazy highs in 2021, most of them will probably not go to new highs. It could be a group of new cryptocurrencies that go to new highs or a select few from the prior cycle. So we have to remember that. We also know that holding their Bitcoin pairs is an important thing before, for the altcoin market to sort of understand, in my opinion, if they're worth the risk or not. It's not financial advice. That's just how I look at it. So what I want to do in this video is I want to show you how a DCA strategy for Bitcoin has been going and then how it compared to altcoins. We'll look at it over various timeframes. All right. So the first strategy, people who DCA'd Bitcoin, $100 a week. I bet there's plenty of people that fall into this category. $100 a week. Let's just ignore 2022. And we'll look at it later, but let's just say, you know what? You came in 2023, fresh start, DCA $100 a week, no matter what, right? No matter what. How would you panned out? How would your portfolio be doing? Well, you would have invested $3,800. You would have accumulated approximately 0.148 Bitcoin, and your portfolio value would be worth $3,960. So you'd actually be up about 4.21%. That's not bad, especially considering the recent price action. Now, this could easily turn red later on in the year. Easily. It often does in pre-halving years. So we have to remember that in pre-halving years, what we accomplish is we wreck the bears and we wreck the bulls. We get both sides sufficiently wrecked before we get to the halving year. So right now, the people who have been DCAing Bitcoin, they probably feel okay because their value of their portfolio is slightly higher than what they put in, right? And if that's the case, then you probably feel pretty good. Those people are not going to be as likely to sell as long as their valuation is trending higher than what they put in. Where it becomes an issue is if it goes red, then some people, I'm not saying you necessarily, but some people might be tempted to sell because of, fear, whatever. They don't really think that Bitcoin will come back next, in the next few years. And that's the bigger issue that we face. But what I want to do is again, for 2023, it's been working out really well for Bitcoin. Last week, people would have been in the red, right? They'd have been down 2%. It's probably going to keep happening, right? Like you're probably going to see this go into the red, especially as we get into the latter months of the year. But that's not the issue. The issue is the altcoin market and how people are doing over there. And before we get to the altcoin market, let's go take a look at ETH. So we're going to compare this DCA Bitcoin strategy to ETH. What if going into the year, you said that you wanted to buy ETH instead of Bitcoin. And instead of putting $100 into Bitcoin, you put $100 into ETH because someone told you that, it's deflationary and it's going to outperform Bitcoin, right? We've been on the other side of that. I've been pretty clear that I think the Ether Bitcoin pair is going down. But if you thought that the supply-based deflationary aspect of it, right, the supply-based model, the deflationary aspect of Ethereum was more important, and you put $100 into ETH every single week this year instead of Bitcoin, your value of your portfolio would be down 5.6%. So had you put it into Bitcoin, it would be up 4.2%. Had you put it into ETH, you'd be down 5.6%. Now, if Bitcoin drops and those people end up going underwater 5 to 10%, then the people who did that for Ethereum could be underwater, 15 to 20%. And, and that's what often happens in the second half of the pre-halving year, is that you wreck both sides, right? You wreck the bears in the first half, you wreck the bulls in the second half. You go up long enough to give the bulls a false sense of security, and then you go down, and you sort of wreck both sides before the halving year. So you can see here that DCAing Bitcoin, you'd be up 4.2%. DCAing ETH this year, you'd be down 5.6%. I'm sure there's a lot of people here that have been DCAing ETH. They have no problem being down 5.5%. They're like, what's been talking about? This is par for the course. We know this going in. The issue is what if Bitcoin drops, 10%, 20%? Where does that leave ETH? And again, like, they might not care about that. And they probably have a valid point to say, well, eventually it could recover. And they're probably right. But it doesn't detract from the strategy, which was, if you're gonna, Bitcoin is the safer option, especially from a risk-adjusted returns perspective in the pre-halving year and in the bear market year. You can use the just you wait strategy all you want to, right? You can, and there's a good chance eventually it'll work out. But it doesn't change the fact that DCAing Bitcoin has been better than DCAing ETH, right? It has been. I mean, and you can see that on the Ether Bitcoin chart. Ether Bitcoin has been putting lower highs since the merge. Now, Ethereum, it's down 5.5% or so, but a lot of these altcoins are down a lot more. Like if you were to go look at Cardano, a DCA strategy in Cardano, if you put $3,800 in, $100 a week, it'd only be worth $2,895 right now. You'd be down almost 24% DCAing ADA. Now think about that. Had you DCA'd Bitcoin, you'd be up 4%. Had you DCA'd ADA, you'd be down almost 24%. So let's suppose you were an ADA bull and you fundamentally think, you like ADA and you think that it'll do well next cycle, but you recognize that it's not always about, what you find important. It's sometimes more about liquidity and where we are in the cycle. And instead of buying ADA, even though maybe you like ADA the most, you bought Bitcoin instead, you could then use that Bitcoin to then go buy more ADA than had you just bought ADA. Because again, if you had bought Bitcoin, you would be up. If you had bought ADA, you would be down. And the ADA Bitcoin valuation has dropped considerably. So this shows you that having put money into Bitcoin over a lot of these altcoins, you could then go convert that Bitcoin to those altcoins later and get more of that altcoin than had you just bought the altcoin instead. And by going with Bitcoin, you do get exposure to the cryptoverse in case the cryptoverse goes up, but it minimizes your downside that the altcoin market can see. So imagine if Bitcoin were to drop 20%, where does that put altcoins? It puts them a lot lower. I mean, ADA dropped from this point last cycle until the actual low. ADA dropped another like 60% or something, maybe even a little bit more than 60 to 70%. I'm not saying it has to drop that much this time. There could be some element of diminishing losses, but you have to understand that altcoin DCA strategies, they only work in hindsight when you can sort of rely on survivorship bias. When you can look in the future and tell me which altcoins are putting in new highs, then of course you could go DCA those altcoins today, and then it'll work out eventually. But the issue is that for every one of those altcoins that goes and sees new highs, there's probably 100, at least 100 others that never even get close. Maybe even 1,000 others that never even get close. So you have to remember that a DCA strategy oftentimes works for Bitcoin over the macro scale, but for a lot of altcoins, it can be hit or miss. Like, hopefully you pick the altcoin that isn't a relic of a prior cycle. But I don't know which ones are going to be relics, and I can't tell you, and you can't tell me. So when you're in these bear market years and pre-halving years, it's oftentimes better from a historical perspective to just stick with Bitcoin and to say, you know what, we'll get to the altcoin market when we get to it. Let's just see what Bitcoin does here in its pre-halving year. Once we get to the halving year, maybe alts will start to outperform at some point. But the list goes on and on, guys. I mean, you could choose a lot of these coins. Like if you look at BNB, let's choose some of these like layer ones. I mean, like Solana. Let's go with Polkadot, Avalanche. Let's just look at those. Where would those be? All of them are in the red. Some of them are worse than others. Solana, you'd be down about 8%. BNB, you'd be down about 21%. ADA, 24%. Polkadot, about 25%. Avalanche, you'd be down about 36%. I'm not saying that if you had lump summed it at the top. I'm saying if you had DCA'd $100 into AVAX every week this year, you'd be down almost 36% because it just keeps going down, right? Solana isn't as bad as some of the other ones, but one of the reasons for that is because it dropped a lot more at the end of last year than the other altcoins did, right? It dropped 97% from the all-time highs. I think most of the other altcoins like Polkadot, ADA, and Avalanche, I think they only dropped around 92%. So had you started DCing Solana, you wouldn't be as down as much, but you probably would have also carried some pretty significant losses from the prior year, right? So, you know, if especially if you've been holding Solana the prior year, you would have already been down a lot. And so this move that it's had is more so a reversion back to the mean. But this is interesting. I mean, look, it shows you that a DCA Bitcoin strategy, you'd be up. DCAing a lot of these other altcoins, you'd be down. There's some altcoins that you can go on the list and find, and you'd also be up. And some of them you're probably going to be up more than Bitcoin. But it's hard to know which ones those are going to be ahead of time. You might want me to click on a lot of different altcoins, and you might be frustrated that I haven't clicked on the one that you have. And some of them have performed better, right? Some of them have. And I don't know exactly, is Monero, I mean, we could throw Monero on there. Monero, you're down about 7% with this strategy. Actually, I didn't mean to make it the main one. So if we go over here, let's add on Matic and Litecoin, and let's add on Dogecoin and Chainlink, and what else? VeChain. Let's just go see what all these. Well, actually, I probably added too many, but they're just loaded. You can see where they are, right? Those are all still red. They're all still red. They're all still red. There's some that are green, I think. There are a few altcoins that are in the green, but you kind of have to go digging for them, right? Most of them are not, right? Most of them are not. And the ones that are, are usually ones that were much lower market cap, okay? Much lower market cap. And a lot of times, if they're green, it's not only are they lower market cap, but they were also created more than likely after 2021. So sometimes when you get newer coins, they don't have the same baggage. They don't have all the bag holders from the prior cycle. And so those can be, you know, those are more likely to be green than the altcoins that are sort of sticking around from the prior cycle. But there you have it, right? You know, people can use the just you wait strategy all they want and say, and sort of rationalize why DCAing their altcoin makes sense. But in the grand scheme of things, most of them are down 25%. Not a lump sum strategy, the DCA strategy. They're down 25, 30%, right? So that's where it shows you that DCAing Bitcoin works out over the macro scale. DCAing Ethereum tends to work out as well. A lot of altcoins, it's hit or miss. You don't really know, right? And by the time you know, for sure, I mean, like you just, you can use it as survivorship bias in the future, but it's so hard to know. And I would still say that for anyone who sort of heeded what I said, anyone who maybe focused more on Bitcoin as opposed to the altcoins, they still reserve the right at some point, if they wanted to convert some Bitcoin to those altcoins. And they would get a lot more of those altcoins using their Bitcoin than had they DCA'd that altcoin instead, right? That's the point. Bitcoin gives you the exposure to the cryptoverse that many people are seeking in the pre-halving year in case the asset class goes up, while minimizing the downside if Bitcoin goes down. And if these altcoins are down 20%, right? If people are down 20, 30% on a DCA strategy in these altcoins this year, while Bitcoin's green, what happens if the DCA strategy for Bitcoin turns red? Then the altcoins even get hit harder. And actually, a couple weeks ago, it did turn red, right? Like last week, Bitcoin DCA strategy was red. And I mean, the altcoins were taking a pretty big hit. So we'll see what happens. But my guess is that a lot of these altcoins still could bleed off and on for the rest of the year. And only sometime in the halving year will some of them start to look a bit more attractive, is my guess. But that's where we stand, guys. And you know, we've talked about this relentlessly. We've talked about the Bitcoin dominance relentlessly. We've talked about all Bitcoin pairs. People always say, well, why do you talk about Bitcoin dominance so much? This is why, right? This is why. Look at the table. If you looked at the Bitcoin dominance and you thought it was going to go up at the beginning of the year and just said, well, dominance is going to go up probably, so why focus on anything else? Just focus on Bitcoin. You'd be up. Most everything else, you'd be down. Now, this is from 2023. What if we change this January of 2022? Would you still be up on Bitcoin? You would. Had you DCA'd Bitcoin starting from January of 2022, you would still be up. You'd be up 6%. Your $9,000 investment, $100 a week, for almost 2 years, you'd be up 6%. Your $9,000 investment would be worth $9,540. ETH, you'd be down 6%. Litecoin, you'd be down 17%. Link, you'd be down 20%. You can look at the list. Look at this. Avalanche, the DCA strategy, you'd be down almost 52%. Polkadot, almost 42%. This is not if you had just lump sums. This is if you had DCA'd weekly, $100. It shows you that DCAing Bitcoin in bear market years and pre-halving years is oftentimes much better than DCAing these altcoins because they can just keep going lower, right? And sometimes they get crazy rallies back up to the upside, but all that does is it draws more money in so that when it goes down, people are even more underwater because they YOLO in at the top again. It's a pretty clear trend, right? It's a pretty clear trend. Now, look at 2020. In 2020, and you took it out till, let's go say, the September, let's just go September 22nd, 2021. What do you notice? Oh, sorry, that's 2020. January 1st, 2020 to, I think the issue is some of these altcoins didn't even really exist back then. So why don't we just look at ones that did exist? Okay, so first we'll look at Bitcoin. Bitcoin, you'd be up 83%. DCA strategy, your $9,000 investment would be worth, $16,000, right? What about ETH? You'd be up a lot over that time period from 2020 to 2021. You'd be up 310% on ETH compared to Bitcoin over that time period. 83% for Bitcoin, 310% for ETH. That didn't happen until the halving year, though, right? The halving year. You would have been much better off just focusing on Bitcoin until you got close to the halving year, right? I mean, it's true. Look at where, Ether Bitcoin last cycle, when did it bottom out? It did get its macro bottom in September, but it still kind of retested those lows in the halving year, right? In the halving year. So all this goes to show that it's, you have to understand where we are in the cycle. Look at ADA. Over that time period, you'd have been up 130%. Look at we have to find ones that existed, during that time period, but you guys get the idea. Now, if you carried that out, you'd still be up on ETH, right? And a lot of people tell me, and you'd actually be up on ADA and Bitcoin as well, but you'd be a little bit higher on Bitcoin than ADA, but you'd be a lot more up on ETH. A lot of people say, well, Ethereum outperformed Bitcoin. Why do you keep cherry picking? Why do you keep cherry picking, the recent trend? But that's not the issue, guys. In 2019, we were very bullish on the Ether Bitcoin valuation, right? So you can't go and say, well, you're ignoring this. No, we were very much prepared for that move. We called for the Ethereum tsunami. We called for this move. We called for that move. It doesn't change the fact that it's been lower highs since here, right? Yes, it outperformed it over here, but it was in the halving year that it started doing that. We're still in the pre-halving year, okay? So it's all about where we are in the cycle to understand like what works out better, what doesn't. I was that guy in a prior cycle that just blindly DCA'd altcoins saying, all right, just you wait, you're going to be wrong. you're going to wish you would DCA these altcoins. No, right? No, that was not the case. In most cases, you would have just been better off DCAing Bitcoin, at least until the halving year. And then once the halving year showed up, then getting interested in the altcoin market, right? Total 3, the altcoin market didn't even bottom out until 2 months before the halving last cycle. 2 months before the halving. So if that were to happen again, you're talking about it not bottoming out until February. It could happen. It might not last that long, but it could happen. The altcoin market can bleed a lot longer than people usually think it can. And a lot of these people will just say, buy the dip. They'll say it if you're down 30%, when you're down 40%, 50%, 60%, they'll just say, buy the dip, buy the dip. And then they hope that they pick the altcoin that doesn't become a relic. It's not fun if you pick an altcoin that becomes a relic, right? The way you mitigate that risk is you just focus on Bitcoin in bear market years and pre-halving years. And then once you get to the halving year and the post-halving year, altcoins sort of become on the menu, if you will. But at least by mitigating the risk, you can preserve capital to take advantage of the oversized gains that come in the altcoin market once quantitative easing returns. We're still in QT, quantitative tightening. Altcoins don't like it when liquidity is removed, and they're more likely to go down. So please understand that I'm not a Bitcoin maxi. I don't really care what people say. I'm not. I just recognize the patterns in the market, and we are still in the phase where altcoins tend to struggle, and Bitcoin can also struggle. Things might change. Maybe the altcoin market will finally bottom out and start moving back up. But it doesn't change the fact that you'd have been better off DCAing Bitcoin over the altcoin market, right? The math is there. The data is there. It shows it. Yes, you can cherry pick a few altcoins to make the counter case, but that's always the case, and it does not detract from the overall strategy of focusing on Bitcoin in bear market years and pre-halving years, and then getting more interested in the altcoin market later on. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up.